All right. Well, wonderful. Go ahead and get this one kicked off. Welcome to the 33rd episode of TM 101. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you have been with us from the beginning, we are thankful for you and everyone who's been a part of this with us. We hope you enjoyed the break last week, and we, as Henry was saying, we're excited to see everyone who participated in our homework assignments and the opportunity to check that out, and we'll bring that up in the next webinar. But today we're talking about personal finance, so navigating the ups and downs of finances in the touring and concert industry. So I'm gonna pass it over to Henry, and we will get this thing rolling.
Thank you, Mark. So for months, we've been teaching you the skills to work and live on the road, but we would be amiss if we didn't prepare you for times off the road. A huge part of working in this industry is being able to manage your finances so when the work gets slow or it goes dark completely, you don't have to abandon your dream job and get a 9-to-5 that you hate. Because if you can survive 2020 with no work, you can survive being a freelancer in the music industry. So today we're going to drop some common sense onto your dollars and cents with our special guests, Kelly Brennan-Kleyn and Andrea Espinoza. Thank you both for being here today. Would you mind telling the class a little about yourself? Espinoza, let's start with you, please.
Yeah, so I've been touring since 2011 after I graduated college. I did cruise ships, Broadway touring, and then rock and roll touring. I've done audio for 8 years predominantly, used to work for MTV, PRG Las Vegas, Alliance Theater, all over. And then I moved into automation, carpentry, video. And then what I found as a freelancer was that I would work 6 to 8 months on and then have 6 to 4 months off, or 4 to 6, off. And while I made enough to last me my entire year, I wasn't making enough to where I wasn't starting back at zero, more or less, right? So I discovered that I needed to find a new way to supplement that income and still be able to travel and volunteer and make money while I'm doing those things, right, while I'm off. And so that's kind of how I got into financial advising. Right before Corona, I got my licenses, passed my exams, and that's what I've been doing to pivot in the meantime. And then on top of that, it's also a skill that is transferable. So say ever I want to be a tour accountant, or if a business manager needs help with money on the road as a tour manager now, that's something I can offer. So it just adds more tools to my arsenal and a great way now for me to help people in the industry.
Yeah, no doubt. Congratulations for getting that done while you were touring. That's no easy feat. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Kelly Brennan-Kleyn, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I have been working in the music industry for about 20 years now. I started off as a college concert promoter and then went on and I worked at CAA. Was on the road for about 8 years, doing everything from working with club bands as a tour manager to working as a tour accountant for Cirque and for Beyonce as a production accountant, or Sam Smith as his tour accountant. So really kind of everything from small clubs all the way up through giant stadiums, as well as working as festival controller on some music festivals. And now I work at TriStar Sports and Entertainment. I went back to school in 2017 to finish up the accounting classes that I needed to get my CPA license. I took those classes while I was on the road online, and I spent the end of last year taking all the exams and getting the license. So now I'm able to pivot off the road for a bit and be here, which I'm very grateful for.
Again, I don't know how both of you managed to take on so much while you were touring. Amazing right off the bat, but yeah. Thank you for being here. 5-1, why don't you take off the next section, please?
All right. So Espinoza, can you please share with us your 4 pillars and about paying yourself first?
Absolutely. Okay. Let me share my screen. Can you give me access?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Let's just see. All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay, so the number one thing that I learned in this business, in the financial business, is the importance of paying yourself first, and just how powerful that is. And so with that, I want you to think about this, right? With the end in mind, right? What's the goal? Where is it that I want to be? What is it that I want to be doing? What's your exit strategy, right? And it's not something that we're theoretically taught to think about right away, or we have it in mind, like we know we're going to retire, or we would like to retire when we're 65, 70, but we don't actually start thinking or planning for retirement until we're 50. And it kind of blows my mind. And even more so, you can think about it in terms of the college sense, right? You know, okay, I want to go to college when I'm 18. Your parents know this, but they don't actually start saving until never. And then you have to go to college and take out loans, right? So it's just beginning with the end in mind. What are the mile markers and the cornerstones of my journey, and what can I do to prepare? And so part of that is being financially literate. And so it's one thing to read a book, right? And it's another thing to take a small step, but you need those two combined to change your behaviors, to maneuver your behaviors into healthy action. And that is true financial literacy. And that will eventually lead you to financial independence. I paid off my student loans, I think, when I was 24, maybe I want to say 3 years after. And that was only because I had a plan from the beginning to become financially independent before I was 25. And it's just like, there's no way I'm going to live with this, but it takes diligence and knowledge. And I had no clue. So I had to find all the information myself and then commit, right? So that's important. The archaic way of thinking about money and what we do with our paychecks is you get your salary and then you pay your bills and then you spend your money and then you save or you invest. We hear so many times people say, oh, I don't have enough to save, or I don't have enough to invest, or, oh, I can't do that right now, right? So what we see is that a lot of people will delay their future inconveniences for their momentary comforts, right? So you'll take advantage of, oh, I need this new tire. Oh, I need this new pair of headphones. I literally have a pair of sneakers with a hole in it. And until my toe sticks out, I'm not going to buy another pair of sneakers because I could be saving, I could buy another stock with that. I could put that money elsewhere. And so that's what I think about. And so the new way, and by new, it's just new for anyone who doesn't have the financial literacy, right? The education, is that you have your salary and then you save and invest. So a portion of your salary goes immediately to your savings and investments. And then you pay your bills and then you spend your money, right? So maybe you don't have money to spend for 1 week and you get it for the other week, but either way, your future self will thank you. And so like the general gist of that is that you have your disposable income and then take out your savings and investing, and then you have your spending money. And so it's a little bit of adjustment. But if you budget your money right, which is one of the pillars, is budgeting, right? The 50-30-20 rule. So 50% goes to your needs, like automatically 50%. But before I even think about my needs, I put money aside. So I have a floor of 10%. Anytime, any check, any money that I get, 10% immediately goes into my emergency funds. And my emergency fund is full, so then 10% goes into my investing. And then on top of that, I'll take another like 20 to 30%, depending on what it is, for taxes. And then whatever is left over, I use it for my needs. And so for my wants, I'm left with about maybe 8% on average. But this is a great way to start. 50% for your needs: housing, food, utilities, healthcare, and insurance. And then 20% for savings, emergencies, 401ks, investments, and 30% for wants. I personally would have less for wants and more for savings, but that's just me. So start with budgeting, right? And the next thing is a pillar of emergency funds, which I didn't really know about until I started in this financial literacy journey as an advisor. Was that a safety net between you and life? And so emergency funds are great for coronavirus and for car repairs and medical emergencies and home fixes. My car just broke down at the top of coronavirus, not once, but twice. So I had 2 unexpected expenses that I was not, that I didn't have in my awareness that I was going to need to pay for. And it was fine and I could pay for it, but I didn't want to pay for it. And if it wasn't for my emergency fund, I wouldn't have been able to pay for it. And it worked out so perfectly with timing. But a lot of us don't have that, right? So we have to borrow, we have to take out a loan. And so it's really important that immediately pay yourself first, and you have your savings and have your emergency fund. And so this is just a sheet of how I do my monthly expenses. And this is kind of old, but I would calculate my expenses, essentials, business expenses, continuing education, subscriptions, and food. So for me, food is huge. I don't enjoy cooking. If I'm by myself, why do I need to cook? I'd rather have to pay someone else to cook for me. And so my eating out budget is pretty big. And I allot for that in my expenses. And so my total is about $2,000. So the one thing I want to note, right, as a tip for your monthly expenses is my monthly expenses never exceed more than 2 weeks of my pay. So right, we have 4 weeks in a month, never exceeds more than 2. And on this doesn't even exceed 1 week of pay, right? Like I try to keep it down to 25% of what I'm making a month goes to my monthly expenses, because in my mind, I'm thinking, how can I be, I'm going to be a millionaire when I retire. Like that is the goal. That's the dream, right? That's the end in mind. And I will do whatever it takes for me financially to get there. And so this varies for everyone, right? Everyone has different bills, but my emergency fund, you can see, is 13,000. And it doesn't really add up, but that's because I put a little cushion in it. And so my emergency fund is 13,000 is my floor, right? That's my bare minimum. I will not go below that amount in my account. And not only that, but once I hit that 6-month mark, then I take 3 months of it and I put it in an investing account. And then I build up to that 6-month mark again. And then I take it and I put it in investing. So each time I'm having my money work for me. None of my money sits in a bank account idly. I think that is, I try to tell my clients, you know, like 85% of Americans put their money in the bank, and that's okay. But there are so many more accounts out there that you can use to, what's the term? To have your leverage your money, have your money work for you. And that's my favorite, OPP. And so this is my favorite slide. Everyone has a plan until they get hit. Mike Tyson, I mean, he's the best. But you don't know what's coming until it happens, right? And so I didn't know that my car would break down. I didn't know that I would need to buy a flight to New York or whatever the case may be. And it's because of my planning that I'm able to comfortably make those decisions, albeit as inconvenient as they are, because it's not money I want to part with. So keeping with that theme of beginning with the end in mind, retirement planning, right? So we all know we're going to retire. I would like to retire now, but I'm not going to. And so money, right? The baby boomers are pretty much the last generation to see Social Security, truthfully, and we'll see. And then we have the Gen Xers and the millennials. Like, we're not going to have Social Security the same way. And in fact, 401ks, we'll be lucky if we get that, especially considering this is a tour management panel. Like, we're the giggers, right? We're the freelancers. We don't work for a company. Some of us aren't even incorporated. And so where are you going to find the money to fund your retirement? Like, you need to make that effort. Like, it's really about taking ownership and responsibility of your future dreams. Like, where do you want to be? Again, keeping the end goal in mind. And so this is my favorite thing to talk about, are taxes, because retiring tax-free is the goal. So there are 3 different tax buckets, right? There's taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free. Taxable, this is where you should keep your emergency fund. So my emergency fund is in a robo-advisor where I can get 4 to 12 to 10 to maybe 2% more than I can in a bank, right? And this is where your savings accounts and stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and your income is taxable, right? So it's liquid, it's fast cash. I can go to an ATM with my robo-advisor and I have a card and I can just withdraw money. So that's great. And then you have your tax deferred, which are your 401ks, employer contributions, your IRAs, which are retirement tax deferred accounts, 403Bs for education specialists, organizations, and you have annuities. I have an annuity because I used to do Broadway touring. So I paid into this annuity and now that's something that I will have later on. I have a 401k because my days of Claire. So I have something again. And a lot of Americans are working their way from left to right, from taxable to tax deferred to tax free. And the wealthy are working their way from right to left. Like their main thought is, all right, how can I get all of my money tax free? How can I pay? Amazon paid no taxes, no tax, no federal taxes, and big corporations can get away with it. And so can the wealthy 1%. So you cannot avoid taxes. That is illegal. However, you can pay little to no taxes. And it's actually in the Constitution that says you are not supposed to pay more than your legal amount. And most Americans don't realize that they're actually paying more. And that's a whole other rabbit hole. We won't dive into that. But on that note, there are only 2 accounts that you can, that are tax-free. One second. And one is a Roth and the other one is an IUL. And so this is what we call a rich person's Roth, right? For tax-free. There are 3 different kinds of Roth. You can have a Roth 401k, right? It's fantastic employer availability. You can have a Roth IRA, and the limit this year is $6,000. So there are contribution limits, and then it's $135 if you're single, it's $208 if you're married, and then there's a 5-year rule. So there are all different technicalities. And then there's the backdoor Roth if you convert your 401, or that gets a little bit nitty gritty into.
Espinoza, can you explain to our students what Roth stands for, just so they understand?
To be honest, I don't know the full name off the top of my head, but it is a tax-free account. And what that means is you pay the taxes on the seed. And I apologize, I did not go over that. So taxable, you're paying taxes on the entire amount. Tax deferred, you're paying taxes later, and tax free, you're paying taxes on the seed. So in a Roth account, you are paying taxes up front. And there's a whole history about the gentleman who established it, but I won't go into that. And it's the same with the IUL. And again, you're paying taxes on the seed. So you're starting out with a little amount and paying taxes, and then you have exponential growth, right? And so to compare and contrast the two, with an IUL, you have market protection, you have no contribution limits and principal protection, and you have access to your cash value, and you can pass it on tax-free. So what this means is it's like a savings account with a life insurance policy attached to it, right? So your money is going to both. And then how it works is if you live too long, you can start to withdraw your money tax-free. If you get sick in the duration of your policy, right, and you run out of medical insurance, this can work as your backup to pay for your medical costs. And then if you pass away, your survivor can gain this money tax-free. And it's amazing because if you get sued, no one can have access to this. And then a Roth IRA is a little bit different in that you have the 59.5 rule, you have the contribution limit, and you have the income limit. So it's great. And then you have an early withdrawal penalty. So these two are great because IULs, you have to qualify, right? The caveat is because it's life insurance, you have to qualify for life insurance. And some people with pre-existing conditions do not meet that requirement, so they miss out. And then the Roth IRA is great because if you make under a certain amount, you can just shove money into it. And it's great for starting out when you're younger, as is an IUL, but a Roth is great for just for meeting those contribution limits, those 6,000, right? You can start small or you can just start with safe stocks, right? It is subject to market volatility, so that is also something to keep in mind, but both of these tax-free. So these are my favorite ways or favorite things to tell people about is get both of them. If you can work your way from right to left, if you're 19, 18, get them, right? You don't have to know much about stocks investing, that's fine. You can teach yourself, but start putting money into the account, and then invest in something safe. And with investing, I will say, invest in what you know. Do you know if something's hot or someone says invest in it, if you don't know anything about the company, if you don't know anything about the stock, do not invest in it. So I love Disney, I'll invest in it.
Hey, Andrea, can I just jump in real quick? Obviously, this is US specific, what we're discussing here, and the names of the specific types of plans are US specific, but the fundamentals here are almost universal. You know, those three tax buckets that you discussed there, the taxable, tax-free, and tax-deferred. In my experience, having lived in the UK and Canada, it's the same. They just go under different names. And obviously we don't have the time or the knowledge to cover every country's, you know, tax structures, but these fundamentals that we're discussing here are universal. So for our listeners that are in other countries, you know, just look into what your own country calls them, but the fundamentals are pretty universal in my experience.
Absolutely. And thanks for touching on that. Because if you ask Warren Buffett, rule number 1 is never lose money. Rule number 2 is never forget. Rule number 1, honestly, always have your money working for you. So therefore, financial cornerstones, protection, right? Protect yourself from going into debt. Protect yourself from having to take out loans or do anything that's going to cause you to lose more money in the end. Then grow your money. Constantly be thinking, how can I leverage my money, right? And then safety, right? How can I be planning for my retirement? Because that is a safety net, my emergency fund. And then tax advantage. Tax free is the way to be. That's a cheesy motto, but it's something that we could all utilize in our financial learning journey. So just some next steps, right? Number 1, make the commitment to yourself, make the commitment to show up. No one is going to say, here, let me show you how to save money. You know what I mean? I fortunately had someone that sought me out and said, hey, I can teach you something. And I was like, whatever. You know what I mean? Like when I first started at Claire, I had the opportunity to sign up for life insurance and I didn't because I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it was. And I was like, oh, I'm young. Why do I need life insurance? You know what I mean? I could have saved so much money. Like I could have done a lot more. However, I didn't have the education and awareness, right? So assess your financial decision, your financial situation. Where are you and where do you want to be? And don't let where you are be a hindrance or deterrent from where you want to go, because possibilities are endless. And if coronavirus has taught us anything, it's that nothing is so secure, nothing is safe. But at the same time, everything is possible. And you can have your glass half empty or half full. Abundance mindset. There's enough to go around for everyone. So keep that up, like keep that mentality. Clean financial clutter. I'm going to show you 2 slides that I use for my financial dealings that are very helpful in terms of how you can just really be diligent about your finances. Creating a budget, so essential, so helpful. It's phenomenal to write it down and it will change your life when you see what you spend your money on. And then know the rules. One second. Excuse me. Know the rules for what it is that you want to do and how you can live. So retirement, The Retirement Miracle, I believe it's by Patrick David Kelly, is a really great book. The Power of Zero Will Change Your Life. It's by David McKnight. That is one of the best books I've ever read. And the Unshakable by Tony Robbins. That's a great book. All right, so this slide I love to add in because it relates to money as well. Do the hardest thing first. I have a minimum 10%, and I encourage everyone to have 10%. Anytime you get paid 10% of your money, don't even think about it. 10% goes into an emergency fund or an investment account. And that's how you can start small. And then don't beat yourself up, because with coronavirus, I've had to adjust, as many other people have had to adjust, how I save my money, what I'm doing with my money, like my whole everything just kind of not necessarily went up in flames, but went into, okay, how do I adapt, right? How do I pivot in this moment? And then establish a routine. Automate as much as you can. If you know you're going to be on tour for, say, 6 months, automate up until that point. I will go into my phone, go on my computer, and I will automate a start and an end date so that I don't see that 10%. And it's 20% now. Like I don't see it at all, and I don't even have to think about it. And another tip I would say is have a separate account, even maybe a separate bank account for your emergency fund and for your savings, so that you don't see it. You don't see it, out of sight, out of mind, and then life of luxury later on. So this bill tracker that I use, I personally love to write everything down because I'm a visual learner, a visual person. I write all my bills down and then I mark them off. And now I'm at a point where my bills are on my calendar. And so I get alerts, I get reminders, but write your bills down. and your bills change every month. So write like what you think your bill's going to be and then what the actual amount is, because sometimes you have money left over. Put that in your emergency fund, put that somewhere else, like account for your bills at the maximum amount that you think they're going to be, so that when you have some left over, you can sock it away. And it's just a great little habits. So this is something that I have used in the past. I do this every month. Now I do it weekly because it's coronavirus. I'm not doing much else. But I do weekly expenses, and I will do a card total, an item cost, and then I link this to receipts. Take pictures of your receipts all the time. And then I put them in a folder, and it's so simple. It's so simple to devote an hour to go through your finances once a month. Like that's the smallest, you know what I mean? I do it 4 times a month now because it's just simpler. But once a month, just go through your finances, and then boom, make a spreadsheet and do whatever it is you need to do. And then tax season, especially for us freelancers, when tax season comes, you can give this to your tax accountant and you can say, here you go. And they will love you so much more for it. And so there's my email if you want more information. I really hope that provided value for you guys and you got something out of it. Thank you for giving me the space to share.
I wish you would have shown me that 20 years ago.
Right?
Oh my God. If I had seen that when I was starting, I'd be a millionaire right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding. Like I would be.
Yeah, no, this is a trade. Yeah.
Yeah. Super. So
Very impressive.
yeah.
What was the other? We had some students asking about the books. I caught there was Unshakable by Tony Robbins, The Power of Zero by David McKnight. And what was it, the third one?
The Retirement Miracle.
Retirement Miracle.
Yeah, so Patrick David Kelly and David McKnight and Tony Robbins are my 3 financial, not gurus, but the guys that I go to, Patrick David, because they're all about how to retire tax-free and how to have your money work for you. So I would check them out.
Thank you.
So Kelly, now that we've talked about what to do with your money, once you get hired, and there's so many ways to get paid or corporate, can you talk to us? Let's talk your presentation about how to get paid and what it all means.
Let's see if I can get my screen share going. So, okay.
Yep.
Ways to get paid. The difference between being a contractor and being an employee.
And we should say that mostly for like the UK, for our UK students in Europe, they're mostly going to be an independent contractor, or as we call it, a 1099. So
unless maybe they own their own company. I mean, there are a lot of people that I know that are in the UK that have limited companies as well. So I think you've got some options there.
Okay.
So in the US, typically either you're going to be an employee or else they're going to pay you 1099, which is really the tax form that you get at the end of the year. So here's kind of a little difference between each one. You've got, if you're an employee, you're working for a company, they're going to deduct all of your taxes for you, or most of them, and they're going to remit those to the US government, to the state governments, to the local governments on your behalf. They're going to cover your employer portion of your Medicare and Social Security tax. In tax and in law, people love, my husband calls them an FLA and a TLA, which stands for a 4-letter acronym or a 3-letter acronym. So I apologize that there are so many of them here. He makes fun of me all the time. But so essentially when you're an employee, your employer is going to cover your employer's portion of this FICA taxes. So if you make $1,000 as a contractor, you have to cover that 7.65% out of your contractor fee, where when you're an employee, the employer covers that for you. At the end of the year, you get a W-2 form, and then you're covered by all these worker protections as an employee. So that means that you're covered by your employer's workers' compensation insurance. So if your foot gets run over while you're on tour, all your medical bills will be paid by that insurance. And you're also protected under the Family Medical Leave Act and Equal Opportunity Act. and the ADA laws when you're an employee. Something that made me a little bit crazy that I learned when I was taking my business law classes as part of my CPA coursework was that these laws, like the Equal Opportunity Act, doesn't apply to contractors. So there are state laws that might, but like, it's something just to keep in mind if ever you are a contractor and you feel like you're being discriminated against, that some of these laws might not protect you if you're not an employee. When you're a contractor, you're running your own business. So even if it's only in your name and you're self-employed, like really you're running a business, which is awesome. You're a business owner. But it means that you're responsible for paying all of your own taxes and with complying with all local laws. And ignorance of the law has never been considered a justification for breaking the law. So like if you get caught not following all of the rules, like not knowing what the rules are, isn't considered a reason to have not followed the rules. At the end of the year, you might receive a 1099, which is the tax form that you would get if you're an independent contractor. If you have an S Corp, you won't get that tax form. And there's the potential for increased reward, but also the increased risk that you're taking on. And it's often how you'll be paid when you're working outside of the US. So if you're an American working for a UK artist, a lot of the times in the UK, they'll pay you as a contractor regardless. You still have to pay taxes on that money. You're not going to get a 1099 at the end of the year from them, but you do still owe taxes on any money that you earn. And it's also how you'll be paid for any rental equipment that you rent out. So I know that yesterday we were talking a bit about like increasing your revenue streams. So maybe you want to rent a van out to people as part of your tour management practice, or maybe you want to rent out equipment, and you'll always be getting that money as a contractor as part of your fee. You wouldn't get that as employment income. So I know that there are often a lot of questions about like, how do I decide which I want to be, if I want to be an employee or if I want to be a contractor? And a lot of the times, the answer to that is you don't always get to decide. Like a lot of the time, it's something that's determined by the person who's paying you, and they're doing their best job to apply the rules and the regulations that they have to comply with. So it's a question of law a lot of the time. And they're just doing their best job to comply with how they read those rules. But if you really feel like you want to be, own your own company and start your own business, I would really recommend doing a cost benefit analysis, which includes the cost of compliance, to figure out like, does it make sense for me to pay all these costs? Or am I going to be better off just continuing to be an employee and having my employer pay my taxes for me? Like if you are not always the best at saving, it's probably better to just stay an employee because you're going to have big tax bills at the end of the year. You also, I think, have to think about your long-term goals. Like if you want to be in the industry for a few years and travel the world and then go do something different, maybe don't start a business. Where if you want to be the next Jake Berry and you want to rent out equipment and you want to hire crew members and you want to do all these things, I think thinking about what your long-term goals are can help you determine what your plan is right now. And I know that there are a lot of people who sometimes want to be paid as a contractor, and they're concerned that they're being told they can't because they're being told they have to be an employee. A lot of times you might have to form a corporation, and depending on the person that you're working for, that might have to be an S Corp, which takes a lot more paperwork. So sometimes I think people get a job and they're not sure, like, am I being paid as a contractor or am I being paid as a employee? And it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So essentially, this W-4 is what you would complete if you are being paid as an employee, and the W-9 is what you would complete if you're being paid as a contractor. And so that's how you'll know right away, like, how am I being paid? Whichever tax form you filled out is how you'll know. And if you're foreign, in America, a lot of the time you are asked to fill out forms. Again, these are the tax forms that you would complete. And if you are a UK citizen or an Australian citizen, as long as you get a social security number in the US, you won't have to pay taxes in the US most of the time on that money based on tax treaties. Depending on what country you're from, there may or may not be a tax treaty. And it's not that hard to get a social security number. Your tour manager can usually help you do that. You go into the Social Security office about 2 weeks after you come into the US on your first work permit, and you apply for it. And then you can also do things like apply for US bank account, stuff like that. So the pros of being a contractor, like you own your own business and there are a lot of potential deductions. So you can have business write-offs for your home office space, or you can write off your health insurance, or you can start a 401k, or, pay lower payroll taxes. There are a ton of things that you can write off as a business expense. I've included a link here that you can go and read every single business deduction that exists. And it's got a lot of pros to it, but if you're not making enough money yet that those things help you with your taxes, then you probably should remain an employee for longer, because you also have to budget for all of your taxes and pay those taxes to the government. If you start an S Corp or even an LLC, you're going to have additional reporting requirements that are going to be extra paperwork. So either you're paying an accountant to do that, which costs more money, or you're having to do it yourself and learn all those processes. If you're a contractor, you're going to have to start thinking about liability insurance, because if you are renting out a van to people as part of what you do, and you get into a car accident in that van or anything else, and you're working as a contractor, that liability will be on you personally as an individual potentially. And so you'll want to make sure that you have liability insurance and that you set up a company to shield you in part from that liability. And also, when you're a contractor, you usually don't get unemployment during downtime. Obviously, COVID is a little bit different, but if you need to budget for the highs and the lows of touring if you're looking to be a contractor. And so this is kind of the types of companies that you can own. So from the least amount of paperwork until the most amount of paperwork, you just have to think about that when you're trying to form a company, is how much paperwork do you really want to deal with? So if you're looking at setting up an S Corp, there's going to be a lot more paperwork for you to do. You're going to have to file additional tax returns each year. There's all these steps that are extra. Yesterday we were talking about whether or not your per diem is taxable, and the annoying answer is that it depends. Again, I've included some links here, but the general rule is that if you are getting money, you can't then also deduct the expenses that you're incurring. So if you are receiving money as per diem, don't also deduct the expenses as expenses. And then my favorite roadie money saving tips, I think everybody should stop paying bank fees. I am such a lover of the Charles Schwab account in the US, because you don't have to pay bank fees anywhere in the world. You get all of them back. I've saved thousands of dollars on ATM fees over the years. And I'm I don't want to pay ATM fees anymore. And in the UK, there's Monzo accounts. The other thing is asset protection. I know that earlier we were talking about how you can start an IRA or a Roth IRA or a 401k for retirement, but it's not just about retirement. One of the great things about those accounts is that they protect your assets in the event of bankruptcy and things like that, which is really nice because it means that you have that cushion. If you have a medical emergency happen, or your spouse all of a sudden can't work and you have to take care of them, or all those things that happen in life that can cause bankruptcy. If you have money in your IRA or your Roth IRA or your 401k, those can't be taken from you during bankruptcy. So you have money at the end after you've come out of it. And that, I think, is just a nice thing to keep in mind. I think it's really important to make sure you keep health insurance. I know, again, that it's expensive, but it's the major cause of bankruptcy in the US. And I know a lot of people don't get that through their employment as a road person, but I think it's an expense worth incurring. Oops. I don't know if I can you guys see the bottom thing? I can't see it.
Hey Kelly, I'd love to get a little more specifics on like the differences between like when you like taking a little step back on incorporating an LLC versus an S corp, and the similarity between the two when they work together. Like right, myself, I have an LLC and I do my payroll as an S corp. Like just the variances of that, and then the equivalents to UK, Europe, or anything international that would be kind of an equivalent for our international students.
Absolutely. So you can form an LLC, and what's nice about it is that you can do all of your taxes so that it's either taxed as an independent contractor or that it's taxed as an S corp, and you can make that decision. It's called a check the box election, and it's something that makes the LLC a really flexible type of business. It's, in comparison to an S corp, there's less paperwork required. It's a lot more flexible in terms of ownership. If you want to have a partner that comes on, it doesn't require you to have minutes where S corps would. So it's a lot more flexible, but there are a lot of companies in entertainment who won't let you be a contractor if you don't have an S corp. They require that you have the S corp. So it just depends. Some people will require that, some people won't, and it just depends on who's paying you. So it's something to be aware of, that if you always want to know for sure you're going to be allowed to run your company through your own corporation, then having the S corp is always going to work, where having an LLC might not. And essentially the difference between the two is that both of them are pass-through corporations. So that means essentially that all of the money that you receive is taxed on your individual tax return based on your tax rates, where like a C corp has its own separate tax that it pays. There's a double taxation there. S corps and LLCs don't. And with all of these companies, you have to determine what state you want to file the paperwork with the Secretary of State. So like, just because you live in California doesn't mean that you have to have a California company. You could have a Nevada company. But I think that it's something that if you are considering becoming a contractor and starting your own company, like there's a lot of research to be done there, and you should probably speak with a lawyer or else really do the research to figure out what's the best thing for you and for your business, because depending on which state you're in, the taxes might be different. You might have to have a registered agent that you're paying for in that state. So like, if you have a Delaware corporation, I think you have to have somebody in Delaware who's getting your mail, things like that, that there are different rules for each state, and it's going to depend on what's most important for you. So yeah. I would talk to a lawyer and an accountant.
Sorry, not to, and just to add to that, I resonate with that 100%. As someone who travels full time, God forbid something happens to me, half my life I keep in my hometown. I still have my accountant there. I have most of my half my life there in case there's an emergency, or something happens. And that's a really good example that we live on the move. So where I am right now, I may not see for 7 or 8 months out of the year. So that is a really important point.
Totally.
And
I think with all of these, like if you're thinking about starting a company, like having a conversation with an accountant and with a lawyer is worth the investment at the beginning, because they might know things that you might not be able to be aware of.
100%. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Would you like to touch on, this is kind of a cross question for Kelly and Espinoza. Would y'all like to discuss write-offs? What defines a write-off? Whether you're an employee or if you are a contractor, like what the variances of write-offs and the importance of write-offs, and then touching on receipts, keeping track of expenses and stuff like that. So maybe just kick it off, Kelly, and maybe we can kind of just roll over.
Yeah, so the way that you're going to write, I think that tracking your receipts, as Espy was saying during her presentation, is so important, and you can take photos of them and put them in a Dropbox, or I really like an app called Expensify, and I also really like Quicken, where I can track all my money and take photos on my phone. And essentially what you're able to write off is dependent on whether or not you're an employee or if you're a contractor. So if you are an employee, you would be writing things off on your Schedule A on your taxes. And in order to take those write-offs, you have to make more money than the standard deduction, which is $12,400 for an individual. If you are running a company, then you can write off things automatically off of the, you take your gross income and then you just subtract the expenses first. You don't have to get that $12,400 before you can take additional deductions. So I would really recommend taking a look at this small business self-employed deducting expenses if you're thinking about starting a business. You can know all of them. But business write-offs of like health insurance and home office space and equipment that you use and anything business related are all, if it's justifiable and reasonable, you can write it off. Do you have anything to add, Esty?
Just with that, gas is something that you can write off, your car insurance, depending. But I believe there's the link there to just go through. And then for receipt purposes, if you don't want to do pictures, if that's too much work, just put your receipts in a bag. Something I learned from a tour manager was to tape the receipts to pieces of paper. And so I previously, before I was even tour managing, after I tour managed, I would do that and send it to my accountant that way also. So there's so many ways, but really the focus is to take responsibility and take ownership for your life, for your goals.
Well, and I think also that it's like starting good habits early on, because like once you get in the habit of it, it gets really easy. It's just, so if you're 22 and you're just starting out, if you start doing it today, then by the time you're 26, you're going to be really good at it when you're going to be making enough money that it's going to actually affect things, because habits don't just start, like it takes a while,
Yeah. And on that, I think now, especially the situation that we're all in, is the best time to start, because we're not doing as much as we would normally be doing. And it's so hard to continue the habits on the road. It is incredibly hard because your attention is everywhere. So if you can now start your budgets, start your receipts, start it all now, like with the smallest amounts that you have, it becomes so much easier later on.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it now while we have the time. But Kelly, I was loving your slides here. I'm sorry, where did we leave off? I wanted to keep going.
Well, so I think I was just talking about so my favorite roadie tax breaks maybe, which are, for those of you, like, I don't know about you guys of why you got on the road to begin with. Like, I did it because I was super excited to travel and to have somebody else pay the bill for me traveling. And so I spent quite a few years where I was, especially when I was like working for CERT, where I didn't go home. I didn't go to the US. I was out of the country for 350 days out of the year. And I was just traveling and staying in foreign countries and living in a foreign country for 3 weeks at a time while I was off, whatever. And so there's a thing called the foreign earned income exclusion that I think for those of us who are older now that have more of a home life, maybe it's not going to work out for you. But for people who are using touring as a way to go out and see the world, you can deduct the first $96,000 of your US income and not have to pay any income tax on it in the US. You still will have to pay tax in other countries if you owe it. So like, but a lot of times, like, let's say you're in a country for only 1 or 2 days because you have a show there for 1 or 2 days, you probably won't get to the limit where you're going to have to pay the tax in that country. So it's something to keep in mind. It can be, if you're living a lifestyle where you're literally not in the country in the US at all, there are certain tax breaks for that. The other thing I think is really good to keep in mind is that this year is a really slow year for a lot of people. And so it's a good way to take advantage of converting your regular IRAs or your regular 401ks into Roths, because you're going to pay tax this year, but like, it's okay, right? Like last year I had a baby and I didn't work very much. So I used last year to convert all of my regular IRAs into Roths because I didn't work very much. So I didn't have to pay, like, my taxes were super low. But as Esty was saying, now it means that those accounts are tax-free for the rest of my life. And if I give them to my kid, they're free as well. So taking advantage of this opportunity that like maybe you don't have a lot of income coming in, but maybe you can, see if you're able to convert and save money on taxes.
Oh, that's really smart. I wish I would have known about the foreign earned income exclusion 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I learned about it from Cirque because they had so many kids that you're like a gypsy.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of roadies do that.
Yeah.
Okay. What's next?
And Kelly,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier about foreign, like working for a foreign employer, and that's pretty common in our industry. Canadians working for Americans, vice versa, UK working for Americans. Once you get to a certain level of touring, people will hire from anywhere. If you were, for example, if you were a UK-based touring, say front of house engineer, and you're about to go on an 18-month album cycle with an American artist, you're obviously going to have to file taxes in both countries, right?
So it depends. You're still going to have to file taxes in the UK for sure. But the way that it works in the UK, it depends on if you wind up becoming a tax resident of one of the countries. So it depends, like if you're a UK citizen and you are in the US for literally that whole 18 months, then you're going to be considered a tax resident for US tax purposes. And yes, then you will have to file. But if you're only in the US for a short period of time and you're working as an independent contractor, you may not have to based on the tax treaty. You will have to get a social security number though. So otherwise they'll have to withhold 30% from you. So
Right.
It's important that, you do that. And then, it just depends on how long you're actually in the US for.
Right. So I guess the first course of action would be speak to the artist's business manager, and they're likely, if they're experienced, going to know what your tax implications are. And if they aren't, maybe have a brief consultation with a tax specialist, because, if it's going to be 18 months, 2 years, or a continuing thing, you want to make sure that you are doing things right from the start.
Absolutely. And like, I will say that, if you're from the UK and you are going to be in the US for 18 months, it actually is probably going to be better for you that you're paying tax in the US because the tax rates are generally lower in the US than in the UK. So if you become a tax resident of the US, it can actually be beneficial for you in terms of your overall tax that year. But again, like my husband's English, and so I spend a lot of time in the UK, and I tour in Canada with my own company, and I work in the US. So I have an accountant in the UK, I have a tax lawyer in Canada, and I have myself in the US. So it's something that, when you get to a certain level and things get complicated enough, I've saved a lot of money by reaching out to those experts. Sometimes it takes a little bit of money to save a lot of money.
Absolutely.
That's a really good point. That I've seen people every year when it comes to tax season or when it comes to incorporating, they cheap out and try to do it themselves when, for a very nominal fee can have an expert managing or giving them advice. It like she said, it saves you thousands of dollars. But I don't want to get off topic because your next slide here is obviously more business resources, SBA, Expensify. I just went on Expensify's website. It looks pretty cool. Tell me more about these.
So the SBA website is just for anybody who's thinking about starting their own company. It's a small business association, and it's got a lot of good resources that can help you out in terms of forming your own business. Lots of different options, and they have local centers in all over the country where you can speak with an expert who their goal is to help small business owners. So they can give you some advice or where to go for further information. Expensify, again, I'm so lazy. I want to take a picture of something and have it scan all the information and link it up to my expenses. And I don't want to, I want to do minimal effort for maximum results. So that's why I love Expensify. I can just take pictures of receipts. It takes the information from the receipt, it reads it, and it matches it automatically to my credit card transactions. And I don't have to do anything. It's amazing. And then I know that there are a lot of people who are employees of while they're on tour, and like maybe they all of a sudden get these W-2s for like 30 states. And so this link will show you where to file your state taxes for free. for each state, because a lot of times you get charged per state. And obviously, I think for your federal return, you're going to want to use an expert maybe, but like the state filings, it can get really expensive really fast for like a $3 refund. So this link, it'll take you some time to file all your taxes this way, but it'll be free. Otherwise, I would recommend finding a CPA that will do them all for one bulk cost, because a lot of them have tax software that'll just run all of the states at the same time, and it doesn't really cost them extra money. So I know that can be a concern where people are like, oh God, I'm an employee and now I had to, file 30 state income tax returns, but there are ways to not have to pay, an extra $30 per return, because that gets crazy.
Yeah, it definitely does. My accountant looks at me like I'm crazy every time I hand her an entire notebook of
W2. Like, here you go. Sorry. I think that's most of my stuff.
Well, then, on that last point, it kind of brings me to my next thing I wanted to talk about that we kind of touched on, which was per diems, because, it's somewhat controversial of, how people are getting paid per diems nowadays. A lot of the times, we're used to getting it in cash, but a lot of tours are going cashless, and it's being sent to their bank accounts along with their paychecks, and it's being taxed. So let's touch on that for a second. How do we handle being taxed for per diem? And then, when it comes to the taxes, when you were saying filing each state, you have the option of claiming the difference, right?
Yeah, so I think that it's two things.
Yeah.
The first is it's going to depend on if you're an employee or a contractor, right? Because technically, when you're a contractor, even if you're getting the per diems in cash or anything else, you should be including that in your gross income, and then you should be deducting the expenses. And there's a per diem allowance per city, which is in this link, the gsa.gov travel resources, and you can take your tour plan and put in each city that you've been to, and it'll tell you what that per diem rate is. And then there's a link to the Department of State's website as well, which is where the international rates can be found. So that's in this same link. It'll give you the one for the international. And that way you can deduct based on where you've been, and that'll be, more beneficial for you most of the time than just deducting each expense.
Yeah.
Because it's easier, it's less work. Whether or not when you're an employee, it becomes taxable or not, it's going to depend on how you're being paid, and it's going to depend on how the person that is paying you, their reading of the tax rules. And so like if they're considering it an accountable plan versus a non-accountable plan. I feel like a lot of these answers, people are like, oh God, these answers suck, because they're really unsatisfying, and I wish that I had like a better answer or an easier answer. But I've tried to include some links here. Like if anybody really wants to nerd out and like really understand the rules of exactly how it works, tax law is super dry and dull and boring, but but it exists. And that's something that I didn't really realize until I went back to school for my tax classes, is that it's super easy for me to just go and I can read what the law is. And so I do, because I'm a nerd, but this link to the Cornell website, any law that you want to read about or any rule that you want to read about is there. And so I think a lot of the times people can get frustrated because they're like, oh, I don't understand this rule, or I don't know why this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. And like, this is really dry reading. It's not going to be, like your summer hits, but it will give you all of the information, because everybody's situation is different. Like what's right for you isn't necessarily going to be what's right for me, which isn't necessarily going to be what's right for somebody else. And that's why either you can pay for the experts who can know all the information based on your situation and be like, okay, for you, this is the perfect thing, da, 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 da. Or you can go and you can educate yourself because you know what's right for you better than anybody else. I wish that it was a better answer.
No, it's all true stuff. I mean, there's no easy, like, I think whoever said it in the beginning of like, it's your own onus. No one is going to teach you how to manage your finances and do what's the best plan for you. And so this has been super helpful because I'm learning things I didn't know about and choices that I had that I didn't even know about. So sorry, but Doug, take it off with the next question.
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to sidetrack quickly. There's a question from Tammy in the Q&A. Is there a difference between sole proprietor versus independent contractor?
No, it's basically the same thing. So when you're a sole proprietor and you're an independent contractor, you're operating in your name. So there's no distinction in the eye of the law. There's no distinction between you and your company. It's the same thing. I would still really recommend, if you are working as an independent contractor, it'd be good to get like a separate business banking account. And so that way, anything that's business related, you're paying out of your business account, just because it makes it so much easier at the end of the year with tax time, or like when you're keeping track of things, to know what was a business expense and what was a personal expense. And it makes it a lot better if you get audited later on, that it's, you know, you've separated your accounts. So even if you're just working as an independent contractor, it's good to do that.
Awesome. Thank you. I wanted to touch on some apps and tricks of the trade that can help touring personnel manage their finances, because I think the recurring theme here from everyone on the panel is, I wish we'd had this 20 years ago or 10 years ago when we started out. And it's, you know, when you start out on the road, you're almost just so excited that you have a job on the road and you're being paid to go and travel. You're just not thinking about these things. And I love SB's approach to this from the start. Like, I want to make X and I want to get there by X. It's such a structured approach, and that's what is massively missing from a lot of people in our industry. And you know, Kelly, I think you also referenced, or somewhere in the slide it said, a massive percentage of bankruptcies are health related. So it shows that people aren't being prepared for rainy days well enough. And I think, taking from what both of you guys have said, is that there really needs to be you know, I mean, I don't even need to hammer this point given coronavirus and everything that's happening right now, but the emergency fund sizes are maybe need to be bigger than we originally had. We need to have them in spaces where or places where they're working for us rather than sitting dormant. And as somebody, you know, investing is thinking about investing or investing when you have no experience of it is daunting, especially when you're on the road and you're a tour manager, so you're already spinning a million plates. So to add another bunch of plates and have to be across what the markets are doing is too much for people to consider sometimes. So we mentioned earlier robo investors, and SB, I'd love to hear a bit more on that, because I've started using one in the last couple of years called Wealthsimple up here in Canada, and I love it because I have my TFSA, which is a tax-free savings account, on there. I have a cash account on there, and they all have much better rates than my bank account. And I use one for my emergency fund, and I use one for my savings. And I'd love to just hear, yeah. And for me, you know, I go on and I can check the app, 2 seconds. I can see where my money is, how it's going. And yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about that from you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so exactly. That's what I would recommend to my clients. I use Betterment, and that I have an aggressive approach. You can set up different accounts. So I have a travel fund, I have my emergency fund, and I have 2 accounts for my niece and nephew, just to put in a little bit, excuse me, for them. And then their accounts are rated aggressive. My travel fund's aggressive. So it is subject to market volatility, and that's fine because I'm okay with the risk associated with it. And then on top of that, what's important too when choosing a robo advisor is really looking into, and it takes you a couple of minutes, a little extra minutes, to what you're investing in. right? Because I remember when I first started, I just saw the codes and the stock symbols and the names, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but just clicking on it. And then now they've made it easier so that you can choose, oh, if you want to do green investing, right? If you want to do conscious investing, like that's a thing now. And different ways you can go about it. So there's Betterment, there's Acorn, there's Stash, there's Wealthfront, there's a ton of others. Just do your research and what you're comfortable with. I say the more user friendly, the better, because if you're not an investor, it's really cumbersome and not easy to understand. It can be difficult to understand, but find one that works for you and one that you can link to your bank account. And it's also a great way of having automatic deposits into an account that you don't see regularly. So,
Right. There was a question from Elise regarding what they actually are. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're, if you're investing yourself, you have to choose where you're exactly what you're investing in and what type of investment you're making. A robo advisor is my experience of it is a very user-friendly interface. It's an app where you can select on a scale how aggressive or conservative you want to be with your money. And like you said, there are some other parameters, but ultimately they do the investing for you. Is that right?
yeah, so it's like mutual bonds, stocks, and then you can pick which one, and they try to do an inverse. So you'll have more bonds or more stocks, whatever the case, or more mutual funds. Typically, they're mutual funds, so they have a history of giving you returns already. So there's an establishment of or a precedent of history with that. And so they'll typically go with things that are known to return. And that's like a simple way. And then you can pick on some, you can pick individual stocks. And that's great. But again, that's a little bit more risky, but.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And just having lived through living through a global pandemic and financial crisis, I really didn't see mine drop too much. It seems to me as a newbie to investing and these apps that they didn't tumble as hard as everything else did. I was seeing definitely a dent, but I wasn't. And I was receiving daily email updates from them saying, look, relax, we're going to get through this, keep your money where it is. Think of the long game. This is short term. We're living a longer plan here. And it rebounded really pretty quickly. And that's just a personal experience on my side of things, but I'm really happy with it. And it just I'm just not that way minded. So it's it does it for me. And I'm happy with that personally.
Yeah. Doug, I like using them. Well, I started using it just for the roundup features that a lot of them have. Like if you buy a coffee for, $4.50, it'll round up to the nearest dollar. So 50 cents gets deposited into an account, and then those little charges just add up and and turns into savings for you. But it's fun to like put those on multipliers and try to add up over the year. So I started doing that and just putting away the roundups and the acorns. I would have it run all year. So by like the end of the year, when touring got slow or we'd be off for the holidays, that was like my Christmas present money, or it was slow season money, to be honest. And I had just been squirreling it away there. And then the other, well, it's not an app, but it's another program like we're talking about, just being financially aware. Mint is one that I've used, which was really good because honestly, it takes all your transactions from all the accounts that you choose to put into it and kind of just runs in the background and will organize the spreadsheets into a very easy sheet that I just hand my CPA at the end of the year. So once again, like it's something that I wanted to do because I know I can't keep up with it all year long, but I can occasionally go into the app and make sure that like the charges are where they are. But the acorns I stashed up a couple years ago. I was having it deposit 2 days of per diem every week into the account. And by the end of the year, I paid for my entire honeymoon off of off of the money I saved on stash. So like, it's an amazing resource. Yes, you can get into the investing part, and that's fun. Even if you just start small, you can literally start with $1 or $5 to invest, to educate yourself and see if you can't make $2 or turn it up to $10. But don't throw big money at it until you know what you're doing. But it is a lot of fun. I think I look at my stash app every day as much as I do Instagram. So it gets addicting. Yeah.
One other thing that I think can be really helpful, because I know that when you're first starting to invest, it can be so intimidating. There are index funds that, just track the stock market. And so it can be a good first place to put your money into, and you still, will have market volatility, but you get exposure to all the different parts of the stock market. So I think Warren Buffett often says that if he was to tell, where he would put his family's money if they didn't want to actively manage it, like it would be index funds, because you pick one or two funds and you just put your money in there, and then you can learn more and read more and do more research, but at least you've got the first step, the first place.
And that's something I just want to touch on: active management versus passive management. So a lot of 401ks are passively managed, right? In that there's a company that's managing the funds, but in the event of, say, the coronavirus, where stocks, they cannot change to active management. Like once it's legally established that is how they're managing your money legally, their fiduciary responsibility, they cannot change it. With a robo-advisor, in the times of coronavirus and market upset, they can change it to fit the need of the moment. And that is why Doug hasn't lost a lot of money, because they're able to balance out your portfolio. So that's something important to keep in mind. And then also with that, our 401k fees, people don't realize that they pay about 17% of their 401k in fees. And that if you have $1 million in your 401k, by the time you withdraw, it's really like $600,000 to $750,000 after fees and taxes are paid. So that's just something to keep in mind that not many people are aware of, that they're not the be all end all. So robo-advising is great.
Amazing.
Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, I'm sorry, 5-1. Yeah, I just wanted to mention this really quick, and I know we've mentioned this in another episode, but there are some really great receipt scanning apps that are integrated with Google Drive and Dropbox and whatever you use. I use TurboScan, but there are a million other scanning apps out there. Pay for the $1, £1, whatever the premium version is, and literally, get into the habit of doing it with your artists' receipts and your personal ones as well. Go on Google Drive, set yourself up a folder with your receipts per month throughout the year, so it's ready to go. And then it takes the same amount of time to drop it in the drive as it does for you to stash it somewhere physically. And then there's no chance of you losing it somewhere in your backpack or something gets stolen or lost. So I think that's a super easy thing to do, to make sure that you're just in the habit of logging receipts every time you receive them. Go ahead, 5-1.
So Espinoza and Kelly, can you guys share with us some little things that we could be doing right now?
Yeah, I think right now is such a great time to research the different accounts, because I know that it's like every bank is going to have different fee structures. So maybe now is a good time to look at what fees you're paying to your bank, and is there a bank that's going to be cheaper for you based on where you're at right now. And you can use this time to, like we've been talking about, get into the habit of taking pictures of your receipts, like playing with the different apps to figure out which one is the best for you. Because again, what's best for you might be different than what's best for me. So use this time to play around with all the different options. But I think, remembering that you can negotiate and find better deals. Like my 401k is with a different bank than the rest of my banking, because the other bank gave me free trades. You can find ways to save on all these things. It just takes, it can take a little bit of research sometimes.
Yeah, and on that, I would say at the bare minimum, if you're starting out, start with a budget. Just start tracking your expenses. It's really simple. And especially in a time where we're all saving money, I feel like it's a lot easier to do now. So just set aside a day in the month, where that's something you're going to do, and really just take responsibility.
Essie, what I loved on your presentation was where it was like, start with the big thing first. And I think about myself sometimes, like, I know sometimes there are things that I'm intimidated by, or I'm like, oh, I don't understand this. And so I don't start because I feel like I'm going to make a mistake, or like I don't know enough. And every time that's happened to me, if I just start, it makes it better. You know, like you just have to put your running shoes on to get to the front door to go out. And if you put your shoes on first, that's the first step. And so I think sometimes these things seem big and scary sometimes, but if you just start, that's, you know, really going to help you.
And on that, so James Clear wrote a really great book called Atomic Habits. So with starting with the first thing, I know currently I'm studying for my securities license, my Series 636S, and it's so dry and so boring, but I start my day with that, and then you add a reward to any habit that you're trying to implement. You add a incentive at the end. So I know that once I'm done studying for an hour, I'm going to color, or I'm going to do something fun. That's a great way to really lock in those habits.
SP, you mentioned that the reason you got into the financial side of the industry was to make up the shortfall in the downtime between touring. I think that's a really important thing to mention, especially when you're starting out in touring, because there, you know, once you get beyond a certain point, there does come a time for many people in the industry where they keep, you know, they can't find enough days in the month or months in the year to take on extra work. But our work is incredibly seasonal and is an incredibly peak and trough, you know, boom or bust industry under normal conditions, notwithstanding current situation. So I think I find that really interesting, and I think it's something that's really important that a lot of people don't take a full advantage of is finding a way to augment your touring income to see yourself through the lean months. Because coming back from a 2-month tour or a 6-month tour or an 18-month tour, as well as needing a mental and physical break, you need to see your family, you need to be home, you know, and unless you have something else going on, you're not going to be earning during that time. So I think it's really important that you maximize other revenue streams. And there's things that you can do, like have another career or something that you can, I know touring people that are designers on the side or web designers, or they have some sort of non-location based job that they can also do that means that they don't need to be on tour 10 months of the year. And generally those people are the happiest people that I've met. But I think there are also certain other things that you can do. You talked earlier about buying a van or buying some equipment. That's what I did when I started out. I wasn't able to, I don't mix sound, I don't do any other technical role on the road. So I bought a Sprinter van and I bought some backline, which I rented to the mostly American artists that I was touring with at the time. And I found that was a way to help me get a foot up in the industry at the level I was touring at. Everyone's looking to double things up, and it was just an extra revenue stream that allowed me to be more comfortable at the club level of touring. And there are, we talked about this briefly yesterday, and I think everyone had something that they do to augment their revenue stream. I bought a set of radios that I hire to all my artists. Henry, I think you said you had.
Yeah, I mean, for tours, I have an entertainment case that I'll rent back to the tour, you know. But when talking about like side gigs off the road, I know a lot of roadies that are dog walkers when they come off tour, you know, like there's that dog walking app, and they do that and just like, you know, run Fluffy around the corner for an hour and just make some side money. I mean, it is definitely something that I think all of us should invest more time in, because we're not always touring, and if you could have passive income or even just another side gig that works with our schedules, then like I said at the beginning, find whatever works so you don't have to leave this industry. I've never had another job in my whole life because I've always only depended on this, you know, but until now. And so these are things that I have to think of now that I never thought I would be in this position. So I'm all for the side hustles right now.
Absolutely.
Well, I feel like it's like, I think right now you just have to do what you have to do to get through. You know, if that means that you're going to go work doing something different than, like, I know people in the UK right now who are picking fruit. And is it what they want to do? Like, no, but I'm sure that they're going to learn something from it. And if nothing else, they'll get a good tan and it'll be a story later on. And, you know, it's just getting through until next year, you know?
I just picked up some work on an archival project that's gonna be the next couple weeks. And I'm like, you know, it's scanning and filing a bunch of actually really cool photos, but you know, you can do it from home and some extra cash.
Yeah.
So go and save.
Hey guys, Tammy has a question. It says currently when I do one-offs, the artist gives me cash or drops it into my Cash App. Is there a conversation I need to have with an artist on how I should get paid for a series of one-offs?
Question.
So, I mean, I think that if they're paying, you know, as I said, it will depend on what state you live in. It'll depend on the nature of the gig. It can really be dependent, you know, so if they're classifying you as an independent contractor, what you do want to make sure is happening is you want to make sure that you're filling out some sort of tax form for them so that they're paying you. If they're paying you lots of cash over the year, that you get a 1099 at the end of the year. If you don't get one, you still owe taxes on that money. So just make sure that you keep up with that, because you don't want to get a tax bill 5 years down the road that's like, oh, you didn't pay tax on $10,000 and now you owe us a bunch of money. Because the interest and the penalties, if you don't pay your taxes, are really, like, they're crushing. So just make sure you keep track of that and pay those.
I've learned a lot. I think that's it for today. If anybody has any questions, shoot them now, or else we're going to wrap, because I've got to go figure out what to do with my money, because this has been really exciting. And, you know, obviously no one's working right now, but this is the time to prepare yourselves to do it better when we come back. And for our students that are just getting into the industry, you'll know how to attack it better when we all go back to work. So, it's Doug, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just noticed a question from Lisa that we missed first time around. It was, how would you go about finding a financial advisor other than recommendations? I mean, I would say first and foremost, recommendations from industry colleagues would be where I would go to because our industry is quite specific. But let me throw the question to SB and Kelly.
So I would say definitely recommendations, but also be sure to ask your financial advisor what they're doing with their money, because let them be a testament to what is possible with your money. And if they're not putting their money where they're encouraging you to put it, I would not trust them. So transparency is key when looking for a financial advisor. And then if you're getting into investing, someone with a securities license for sure, 100%. And someone probably licensed, but securities license when it comes to managing money in the stock market.
And Kelly, if you were, and I think I saw this question earlier, would you recommend a specific entertainment advisor, or just is a general advisor going to work?
I think that if you can find somebody who specializes in entertainment, they're going to know so much more about your industry and be able to keep in mind all the different things, because most people in the world, like most regular accountants, are going to work with somebody who works in their own city, or maybe they work across state lines, but it's like a 1, maybe 2 state thing. And so when you work on tour, all of a sudden you're working around 30 states, plus Canada, plus the UK, plus all these things. Most accountants just don't have that background. So I think if you're paying for somebody, you don't really want to be their guinea pig necessarily. Like, if you can find somebody who's already done the work and figured out all the technicalities for weird entertainment things, then you're not paying for them to spend time researching it. You're paying for the knowledge they already have.
Yeah. I will personally say my accountant and business manager, he's been with me from the beginning and has experienced it all now and is ready for it. But for some guy from a small town in Alabama, navigating the entertainment business has been a definite learning curve on the financial side of things.
I just put a link in the chat. I looked at, if you guys ever are on BobNet, in the vendor index, he has tax accountants and financial services. I don't know any of them, but I know Bob does a good job of screening anybody that he recommends. So there's a couple of resources there. It's in the links in the chat. But man, I really enjoyed this one. SB, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you,
Yeah,
SB.
you guys are amazing.
This was great. Learned a lot today.
All right. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed it too. Send in your homework. I'd love to check it out today, and we'll see you Thursday at the same time. We're going to be having a conversation with the amazing Miss Tina Ferris. So have a great week, everybody. We'll see you then. Bye.